friends, welcome to EduTap. So as part of this video series, we shall be covering various topics which are related to the subject of agriculture. Now these topics have relevance from the point of view of various exams that have agriculture as a core component. For example, NABARD grade AB, IBPS AFO, FCI, IBPS AFO Scale 2 in RRB and etc. In this particular video, we shall be having a look at the agro-climatic zones as per the Planning Commission classification. Now friends, before we move forward, let us have a look at the various courses which are offered by EduTap. So EduTap offers courses for RBI grade B, NABARD grade A and B, and CTET course which has been launched in association with Grade Up. We also offer free test series for RBI 2018 examination. Now to know more about our courses, kindly visit our website at www.edutap.co.in, or you can drop us a mail at rithi@edutap.co.in, or you can give us a call at 814-620-7241. Currently we are running a flat 15% discount on all RBI and NABARD courses. Kindly use the coupon code of 15 to avail this discount. Now before we move forward, let us have a look at the relevance of this particular topic. Now it is important for us to know the relevance because it gives us an idea as to where exactly this particular topic falls in our examination syllabus, right? So with regard to NABARD grade A, we see that it is important from the point of view of phase 1 as there is an agriculture and rural development section. In phase 2, this topic falls under agro-climatic zones, which forms a component of agriculture and rural development. With regard to IBPS AFO examination, it comes under the broader topic of agronomy. Now, let us have a look at previous year's questions. By having a look at these questions, it would give us an idea as to what kind of questions can be expected out of such topics, right? So the question that had come in NABARD 2017 examination was number of ACZ as per ICAR classification, and maximum number of ACZ is present in which state. Now when we study this topic further, we would be able to relate with these questions even more. Okay, so let us begin. Now we are starting by understanding the definition of agro-climatic zone. Basically, what is it? Right? So here the point to note is we are referring to a definition which has been given by FAO, that is the Food and Agriculture Organization. So it says that an agro-climatic zone is a land unit which is uniform in respect of climate plus the length of growing period. Right? These are the two things that have been stressed upon by FAO. So first let us understand what they're trying to tell, and then it is easier for us to appreciate this definition. So take a stretch of land. Now this particular stretch of land that we are referring to has certain characteristics that are common. We may call those characteristics as similar. Okay, so these characters in the entire stretch of the land that they're talking about are similar in nature. Now let us take an example, right? So a stretch of land has characteristics like receiving heavy rainfall during a particular month of a year, right? So now all the regions which fall under this stretch of land would receive heavy rainfall or nearly heavy rainfall, right? Next, this particular region has a tendency of receiving bright sunshine in a particular month, right? Now this particular region has black soil. Okay, now so this particular zone, wherever you go, you would get these characteristics. Like you would have that region receiving heavy rainfall, you would see that that particular region is receiving bright sunshine, and similarly it has the prevalence of black soil. So this entire stretch of land is filled with properties that are similar. So we demarcate this stretch of land as one ACZ, one agro-climatic zone. Right? Now when these characteristics differ, okay, so that particular stretch of land would not be called as this ACZ but would be marked as other ACZ. Like for example, we see a stretch of land where there is less amount of rainfall, where there is less sunlight, and there is, for example, say loamy soil, right? Now these characteristics are different for this stretch of land. So now this entire stretch of land is demarcated as another ACZ, for example, say B. Now here we see that it is ACZ and here B. So when we move from A to Z, we see that the characteristics differ. Now FAO talks about two characteristics in particular. One is the climatic conditions and the other is the length of growing period. Now to appreciate this definition further, we shall be first moving on to understand what are the characters based on which this classification is done and what do we mean by this LGP. Then we shall later on come back to this definition and see whether we can understand what FAO says about an ACZ, right? Now friends, any classification for that matter is actually based on certain factors, right? Now in the case of ACZ, let us have a look at what are these factors, right? So we shall see the factors one by one and then we shall identify why are these factors important, right? So these factors are climatic factors such as rainfall, temperature, humidity, etc., soil properties, physiographic settings like topography and drainage. We have the cropping pattern, development of irrigation and mineral resources. Now friends, let us have a look at each of these. Now, why do we take climatic factors into account for classification? Let us take the example of rainfall. Suppose if there is an area which requires heavy rain, which gets heavy rainfall, right? Now, what we shall do is, we shall plant a particular crop that actually requires heavy rainfall for its growth into this zone. So friends, we need to keep in mind that whenever we are planting a crop, it is very important for us to keep in mind the suitable climatic conditions required by that crop. So that is why climatic factors form an important basis on which the classification is done, right? Now we shall move on to the next factor, that is the soil properties. Now, by soil properties, we mean properties like maybe texture of the soil, the moisture content in the soil. Now, for our understanding, let us take a particular example. Suppose we are talking about the soil texture, right? So, by soil texture, we mean that we are inferring whether the soil has a sandy characteristic, whether it is clayey in nature or whether it is silt-like in nature, right? So, suppose if the soil is clayey in nature. So what happens is, we know that if the soil has the characteristics of clay, it would obviously hold more water, right? So we would definitely plant only those crops that require water retention or water stagnation, right? So now this is why not only the climatic factors, even the soil properties matter a lot when you plant a particular crop in an area, right? Now let us move on to the next factor. Next factor is nothing but physiographic settings like topography and drainage. Now what do we mean by topography? Topography is nothing but we are talking about the land terrain, whether the land is flat, whether it is rugged. Rugged means uneven, right? So now why does it matter? See, if there is a crop which requires water stagnation for its growth, then growing that particular crop in a rugged area would not make sense, right? For example, rice. Rice requires water stagnation. So we plant rice in a plain area, right? Or a gentle slope, all right? So because of this, topography plays a very important role for classification of agroclimatic zones. Next, we come to drainage. By drainage, we are talking about either subsurface drainage or surface drainage, right? Next, we come to the cropping pattern. By cropping pattern, we mean that we are inferring whether a particular crop is again and again grown in the subsequent season, or is there a change in crop? What is the spatial arrangement of crops? So all this come under the cropping pattern. Okay, we also look at the development of irrigation and mineral resources. Now, we need to understand that all these factors, right? Because of all these factors, the LGP of crops vary. Now, what is this LGP? This is nothing but length of growing period, right? So it is actually the number of days which is available for crop growth with suitable conditions, right? So for example, let us take rice, right? Rice requires water stagnation, Okay, right? Rice requires good amount of rainfall. For example, say 200 mm. It requires alluvium soil, right? So now these conditions exist in an area only for certain number of days, like for example heavy rainfall. Okay, so what we are trying to say is only these conditions can be found in a for a particular number of days and not 365 days a year. So those particular number of days that we're talking about are actually suitable for cultivation of rice. So those number of days are referred to as LGP of rice, right? So this is what we're talking about. Now all these factors are responsible for LGP. So together LGP plus these factors are taken into account to classify the agroclimatic zones. Now, after having a look at the factors based on which agroclimatic zones have been classified, it would be better for us to appreciate the definition given by FAO, right? So let us have a quick look at this definition once again. It says it is a land unit which is uniform in respect of climate and length of growing period, which is climatically suitable for a certain range of crops and cultivars. Now we have already understood what does LGP mean. So now this definition of ours stands to be complete. Now let us move on and see why is there a need for classifying the various agroclimatic zones. There goes a lot of amount of research while classifying the geographical landmass of India into so many agroclimatic zones, right? So what is the need for taking so much of pain to taking into account so many factors while classifying? See, just the answer is very simple. Now, India has a large geographical landmass, right? There's a lot of diversity in India. Now, here in our context, what kind of diversity are we referring to? There's a lot of diversity when we take into account the climatic conditions, when we take into account the soil properties, when we take into account the various factors like the drainage systems, the topography, basically we are talking about the same factors that we had discussed earlier while discussing the factors based on which such classification is done. So in India, when we move from one region to other, we see that the climatic conditions, the soil properties, the cropping patterns, everything changes. Right? So from this we can understand that it is not possible for us to apply a single agricultural technique or any particular technology practice to the entire landmass of India. We need to regionalize. So basically the motive behind coming up with such a classification is regional planning. Right? And now again comes the question, why do we need to do regional planning? Basically to achieve higher crop production. So this is our ultimate motive, right, for classifying landmass into so many agroclimatic zones. Now we need to understand here that whenever there is a classification which is being done, the end result of that classification is to make jobs simpler for all the stakeholders involved, be it the farmers, be it the government, and be it anyone. So basically here we are talking about making things simpler to enhance the crop production. Right? Now let us take an example of why do we need a classification. Now suppose we know that the government divides citizens of India into APL and BPL, that is above poverty line and below poverty line. Now why is this necessity? Why do we need to demarcate or have a virtual line classifying people? Now, we know that government has very limited resource at its disposal. At the same time, the government needs to meet the needs of those people who are relatively in a lower position than others, maybe socially, maybe financially. So the government needs to target such people. Now, in order to target such people, it is very important for the government to identify such people who are not in a better position when compared to the others. So now the government takes certain criteria. For example, the government sets that if a person is earning less than rupees, say 1,000 per day, then that person falls in BPL category. Right? Now, if that person earns above rupees 1,000 a day, that person automatically comes into APL category. Now, based on a particular factor, the government has come out with a classification. Right? What is the use of this classification? The government is able to target target that particular population and provide them the facilities that they are entitled to, right? Similarly, here also what we are doing is we are classifying the entire geographical landmass into various agroclimatic zones, and based on the characteristics of that zone, we are planting suitable crops there. Now, instead of planting rice in a place where there is no rainfall, there is no water stagnation, we should actually plant rice in that particular zone which has the required characteristics for its growth. Only then we can guarantee higher crop production, right? So that is the basic need or motive behind bringing out such a classification. Now we have understood very well the need of classifying such agro-climatic zones, right? Now we saw that the motive is higher crop production, right? Now here comes a question, how can this be achieved? How do we ensure that there is higher crop production? Now that can be done through effective or the proper utilization of land, water and other resources. To be very simple, we need to judicially use the resources that are available at our disposal, right? Only then we can ensure that there is higher crop production. Now let us come to other question. How do we judicially use these resources that are present at our disposal? Now, in order to understand this fact, let us take an example and elaborate on it, right? Now, suppose there is an area. Now, this particular area receives high rainfall, right? It has a tendency of receiving bright sunshine, right? And there is a presence of alluvial soil. Now what happens is, we know that this particular zone has these characteristics. Now what should be done is, only those crops that require such characteristics for its proper growth need to be planted here. Only then we are actually utilizing the resources that we have, like maybe heavy rainfall, bright sunshine, alluvial soil in a proper way. For example, you see, if we plant a crop which is not suitable for this particular area, then we are actually wasting our resources. So here we are talking about the choice of crops. So when we choose the crops according to the suitable climatic conditions that it requires for its growth, we are actually judicially using the resources at our disposal, right? Now let us move on to the other method of utilizing our resources better. For example, now the government will obviously not come up with a groundwater recharge policy for this area because this area already is receiving high rainfall. Right? Now suppose let us take another area or other zone. Now this particular zone has water shortage, right? So what the government will do? The government will come up with a policy, for example, say for the groundwater recharge. Right? Now, depending upon this characteristic, the government has come up with this particular policy for this zone. Now, because of this policy, the government is actually utilizing the resources which it has. So again, we see that through this, we are maximizing the crop production. In a similar manner, we can use suitable technologies for various ACZs in order to maximize the usage of the available resources. So in this way, we can holistically see that our aim is to achieve higher crop production. How can that be done? Judicially use the resources at our disposal. How can that be done? Through transfer of suitable technology, through choice of crops, through proper adoption of uniform policy, and through distribution of management inputs. To substantiate what we have just discussed, we can see that the Department of Agriculture Research and Education of ICAR has also given much emphasis on agriculture policy and programs based on agro-climatic zonal approach. So we see that how important this classification has become. The institutions have started to plan or come up with policies based on such a classification, ultimately making the jobs easier for all the stakeholders. Now, is this the only classification of agroclimatic zones that exist? The answer is no. There are other important classifications as well. Now let us have a look at them. The first one is given by ICAR. It was launched under the National Agriculture Research Project. Based upon this classification, the country is divided into 127 agro-climatic zones. Right? Now the next important classification is given by the National Bureau of Soil Survey and Land Use Planning. According to this classification, the country is divided into 20 agroecological zones, and these 20 agroecological zones were further subdivided into 60 subzones. These facts need to be kept in mind from the exam point of view. How many number of zones are classified based upon ICAR classification as well as the National Bureau of Soil Survey and Land Use Planning. So kindly keep these figures in mind for exam. Now coming back to the classification which is given by the Planning Commission in the year 1988, this map here shows the classification done throughout India. So here we can see 15 zones have been marked. Now let us have a look at the names of these zones. Now these names are to be memorized for examination. So the names are Western Himalayan region, Eastern Himalayan region, Lower Gangetic Plain, Middle Gangetic Plain, Upper Gangetic Plain, the Trans-Gangetic Plain. We have the Eastern Plateau and Hills, Central Plateau and Hills, Western Plateau and Hills, Southern Plateau and Hills. The others are East Coast Plains, West Coast Plains and Ghats, Gujarat Plains and Hills, Western Dry Region and Island regions. Now let us discuss some of the MCQs which are based on the topic of discussion. Now let us have a look at the first question. So it says, which of the following is or are the factors based on which Planning Commission has demarcated the geographical area of India into 15 agroclimatic zones? Right? So let us have a look at the options. The first option is cropping pattern. Yes, of course, the spatial arrangement of crops as well as whether the same crop is planted in the subsequent years is taken into account as a factor for classification, right? Next, soil properties. We had discussed elaborately as to how soil properties has an effect on the choice of crop in a particular area. So yes, this is also one of the factors for classification. Then moving on to topography. Yes, we also need to understand that it is important for us to keep in mind whether the land terrain is flat or rugged, right? We had also discussed this with an example. Okay. Next, we see rainfall patterns. Yes, of course, this also is a factor based on which classification is done. So our answer stands to be option E, all the above, right? Now let us move on to the next question. So the second question says, which of the following statements is or are correct with regard to the need for classifying India into various agroclimatic zones? So here we are talking about the need. Let us go through the options. The option A says the classification makes it easier for the government to come out with region-specific planning. Yes, this statement is correct because only when India is divided into various zones can the government come out with effective regional planning, because we already have in our mind all the characteristics of the particular zone, right? So it becomes easier for the government to target each zone according to the requirements, right? Next, moving on to option B. It helps to make a decision regarding the suitable area for planting a particular crop. Yes, all this while we have been discussing how important it is to take into account various factors and then decide where to plant a crop. So obviously this is a correct statement, right? Moving on to option C. It says it leads to judicial use of the land, water and other resources. Yes, this also is correct. Next, moving on, it ultimately leads to higher crop production. So we can see here that automatically because of A, B, C, D option stands to become correct. So the correct option to this question will be all the above. Now let us move on to the third question. It's a very direct question. It says, in which of the following years did the Planning Commission classify the geographical area of India into 15 agroclimatic zones? So the answer is very straightforward, 1988. Now in this section, we shall discuss some of the questions. Kindly have a look at these questions and provide the answers in the comment section below. We shall be discussing the answers for this question at the beginning of the next video. So let us have a look at what these questions are. The first question says, as per the ICAR classification of the agroclimatic zones, which state in India has the least number of ACZ? Right? Second question. The Planning Commission has demarcated the geographical area of India into 15 agroclimatic zones. These are further divided into how many more homogeneous subzones, right? Next, the third one. What are the characteristics of loamy soil? Now, what is there next in store for us? So, as part of the next video, we shall be covering 5 agroclimatic zones in detail. With this, we have come to the end of this video, and friends, if you would like us to discuss certain specific topics that interest you, kindly mention in the comment section below. We shall try our best to come up with the videos with detailed explanation on those particular topics. Till then, thank you and happy learning.